Good afternoon. Um, First of all, welcome to all of you to this launch of the Mental Health Wellbeing Initiative. Today, we started thinking about it, of course, recently. Today, hopefully, will help us sharpen our views and approach to this issue so that when we start the work, we are better informed, and we have amazing scholars with us today to help us with this. I should start by saying that I've received, and probably many of you who've written to me are already here today. I've received feedback from the community, from a large number of community members who really appreciate the fact that we're doing this. Some said we're a little bit late, but better late than never. Many volunteered to help contribute to this initiative, and this I can tell you upfront. This is going to be a collective effort. There is no way of addressing issues of this magnitude individually and in a compartmentalized way. We have to deploy collectively our resources, our knowledge, and figure out how to best navigate this very important topic. Okay, now I read my comments. First of all, of course, I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Nasser Louza, who's the president of the World Federation for Mental Health and the director of the Mehman Hospital. Our colleague, Dr. Hania Shoukhami, associate professor at AUC Social Research, and of course, she will be moderating the event today. And last but not least, social researcher and AUC alumni, our own Fayrouz Ibrahim, who I'm told will speak truth to power, and all the more power, Fayrouz. Community mental health and emotional well-being are increasingly a top priority for university leaders, globally, and of course locally. We're no exception. Recent studies have shown a surge in mental health concerns, which of course were further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, not just among students, but also among faculty and staff. And this has prompted education institutions to push for better response systems on campuses to address these concerns. So what we're doing is not new, is not an exception. Many universities have already started doing exactly what we're doing. When we talk about wellness concerns for our community, we talk about various aspects that affect our lives, such as everyday stressors, uncertainties about the future, increasing social pressures, financial anxieties, challenges to maintain a work-life balance, and self-care. We want to foster a culture of care on campus that will enhance our community's sense of belonging, a culture that prioritizes holistic wellness to allow our community to thrive. And this, of course, will be reflected in the students' academic performance. And in turn, we want to be able to address burnout risks for faculty and staff. While AUC has some mechanisms in place to offer support for our community on issues related to mental health, there is definitely room to step up our efforts. And again, this is not because we're bad and others are better. This is a challenge that all universities are facing. All universities have to step up their work and do better because the challenges are really momentous. So this is why I will be forming a mental health and wellness task force. I haven't really decided as of yet on the makeup of this mental health and task force. I'm waiting to listen today. I've been soliciting input from members of the community. Before I form a task force, I want to be clear about the types of challenges that we need to address, and the task force will reflect that. That said, the task force is only a task force, and I will ask the task force to proactively engage with everyone who's offered to participate and to contribute to this effort. And again, this can only be a collective effort. This will be a year-long initiative that will work. By the way, I will form the task force in the next couple of weeks. I promise you that. So it's not I will form a task force and then we'll form it 5 years down the line. This cannot wait. This will be a year-long initiative. that will work on evaluating our current campus environment and will offer recommendations on how to ensure that our campus culture destigmatizes mental health issues. There is nothing wrong with having stresses and issues and challenges and so on. Promotes and supports mental health and well-being for all community members, enhance and institutionalize our mental health services and response systems, and strengthen our ability to support each other. The task force will also address critical issues such as designing strategies to facilitate preventive and immediate interventions. The task force will not only rely on the brilliance and expertise of our colleagues at the Department of Psychology and in the Wellness Center, but we also want to include members of the AUC community to ensure wider representation, but also deeper insight. There is an equally important role that we can pioneer as an academic institution to inform policies, set a model for other institutions to emulate, and impact our larger environment, but obviously we need to start with ourselves. So today with this workshop, we are kicking off the Mental Health and Wellbeing Initiative. And by the way, mental health, some people suggested that we should use well-being. It's mental health. It's not just well-being. There is nothing wrong with addressing mental health challenges. We all have them. I start with myself, but if no one else, we all have mental health issues that we need to address, and there is nothing wrong with that. Let us work together to identify areas on which we should focus in the coming academic year, from current trends and new challenges to ending stigma and finding community solutions. Again, I want to strongly encourage you to join us in this conversation that will happen in the next weeks and months. We are keen to know about the ideas and wellness concerns of our students, faculty, and staff. And now I will hand the podium over to Dr. Hania, who will moderate this event. And again, thanks to our participants. After the participants give their introductory remarks, there will be, of course, we will be, Dr. Hania will take questions from the audience, input, suggestions, ideas from the audience. Thank you again, and please stay tuned.
I'm short. Thank you, President Dalal. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's evident that this is an issue that pulls an audience, or maybe it's our fantastic panelists. I'm very proud to be here today because I think that this initiative needs to be a multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary initiative. Mental health and well-being cross the divide between our psyche and our physical well-being. It crosses the divide between the barriers between those who are recovering, those who are suffering, and those who we need to ensure that they stay afloat and well. So I think this initiative really needs to be a year-long one, and one that starts with this agenda-setting exercise. And the workshop today is just that. We have two brilliant speakers. I'm personally very fond of and proud of. Nasser doesn't need me to be proud of him, but I'm also proud of him. So we have Dr. Nasser Loza, who's he's one of the strongest voices in mental health issues as an advocate, as a practitioner, as a researcher, and as a champion for these issues. And we have a dear colleague, Fairuz Ibrahim, who's a brilliant student who can speak to us, as we said, speak truth to power. And I'm not intimidating her by repeating that, but saying that as a student, as someone who is thoughtful, reflective, she can tell us as AUC what it is that we need to do differently or do better or do more of. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Nasser Loza, who will give a presentation. We are going to keep our presentations 20 minutes or less so that this can be a workshop and so we can hear everyone else. Nasser? Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm not sure, some of you may or may not know how much this means to me personally. My association through AUC, President Dalal, goes back a long way. And 70 years ago, I wasn't born yet, but my mom was at AUC, and she did her thesis on cultural psychology 70 years ago. I think I should get you a copy. It's probably here at home. So there we are now, and yes, you're right. It's a very important step that we're taking here with your support. Basically, we need you. The mental health advocacy in Egypt needs AUC, and we need your help for that. And I want to tell you a little bit about what we've done in our country with the help of many colleagues from the Middle East and from AUB, for that matter, in bringing this legislation to life. And, you know, did we do right? Could we have done better? What's the next step? And what do we do? Because I've often asked myself, you know, it's clear why I am concerned about mental health status and advocacy in Egypt. But why is everyone else? I mean, why isn't AUC doing an initiative on, I don't know, orthopedic patients or cancer patients or renal failure patients? And the answer to that, I'll tell you, is that people with renal failure can speak for themselves. People with bone problems can talk on their own behalf. People with mental illness often cannot. And when they try, society, community, policymakers, legislators aren't always listening. And history has shown this over and over again for centuries. In this part of the world, the more Arab, Islamic culture of our part of the world has traditionally been extremely tolerant and accommodating to people with mental illness. Back in the 19th century, with the beginning of British occupation in this country, one of the serious criticisms in Egypt that we didn't have an asylum then, that mental patients were allowed to live with their families at home, and that in 19th century Britain was not on. You didn't do that. And so Abbasiyah Hospital was built and Khanka Hospital was built as a protection, as a sign of civilization. And gradually the movement, of course, said, but why are you keeping people that long? So cultures evolve and attitudes change, and therefore, as we've made that effort 10 years ago to have this law in Egypt, it's very important that, that advocacy and attitudes to patients' rights continues to be important, because all countries, certainly Egypt, has many laws that are there on the shelves and they're not being applied. I'm pleased to see that mental health laws are being enacted. So let me tell you a bit what we've done. This is not us. We're being called upon for, 15 years now, from the world communities. What are we doing about persons with mental disabilities and persons with disabilities in general? And, you know, some countries have been very loud about it. Nearly all countries have had some kind of legislation or some kind of policies within their health system working out what happens to someone with mental illness, what happens to someone with mental illness if they're deemed to be a risk to themselves or to others. And Egypt was no exception. We have had, I'll tell you more about that. If you want to read more about what's more typical here of our part of the world and the Arab attitudes to the rights of people with mental disabilities, I refer you to this paper published in 2017 on British Journal of Psychiatry. I'm happy to give you references. But you see, our first real law to protect people with mental illness was in 1944. Prior to that, we had policies within the Ministry of Health, directives, but this was the first parliamentary ratification of a law, 1944. But of course, in 1944, there were no treatments. And so if I suffered from schizophrenia, bipolar disorder in 1944, and I was taken to a mental hospital, I would probably live there for the rest of my life. You know, being discharged was the rare exception rather than the rule. And so it was a very good law of 1944, but it didn't assume that people will get better. So it really organized how people ended up in hospital, but didn't really look at how they were going to leave hospital. And people were staying there for decades and for their entire lives, really. I was fortunate in 2006 to work within the government system, and I was able to suggest some changes to that law, and this is where this act in 2009 was ratified in Parliament. It was an amazing experience because we talked of people of different interests and different backgrounds, and to most people, yes, people need protection, but please don't let my brother get out of Abasaya. He's been there for 25 years, so keep him there forever. People had relegated their responsibilities of looking after the family member who's unwell to the state system, and therefore were not willing to take it back on again. So the law looks at a lot of details, and we won't be able in 20 minutes to look at all these details, but let me tell you a little bit. I mean, the one thing we were concerned about is compulsory admissions to hospitals. Now, all psychiatric hospitals around the world would have a majority of people who are coming in voluntarily. Most people come in for treatment because they're not feeling well and they feel they need help for that. A number of people don't have insight, don't appreciate that they need help, and that their illness seems to represent an imminent danger to themselves or to others. And that, I tell you, took long debates in Parliament. What is an imminent danger? So, I'm an important politician in this country. My son is smoking hash. He's failing his exams, and now he wants to go and live with his girlfriend. So surely, doctor, you should lock him up. And because we have such a patriarchal society, over the decades, I think doctors had obliged, stretching the definition of risk to themselves or to others. He's smoking hash. We all know how harmful hash is, so it is harm to himself, so let's lock him up. And gradually, of course, we had to challenge all these things. So an application today, within the new law, an application for somebody to come into hospital in a compulsory admission has to be made by the next of kin or the social worker or police officer or a number of people. But then the psychiatrist needs to assess him before and to be seen as to whether he really is a risk and an imminent risk to himself, and not just challenging society's attitudes and things. And that was an important step. Supervising all these activities is we created the National Council for Mental Health. This is a body that supervises hospitals where patients are detained. And so they basically, and gives the rights to people who are detained to file a complaint or argue against their being detained in hospital. Then they have a right to get a lawyer and to be presented in front of the National Council. And there were regional councillors in Egypt again. We fought very hard to get this Council for Mental Health away from the Ministry of Health. We thought it should be under the Prime Minister because the Ministry of Health is actually delivering most of the service and it can't be supervising itself. But Prime Ministers are not easily convinced to take on more responsibilities, and at that time that was turned down, so we had to settle for that. The Council has a lot of people who are not, there's the Attorney General, Social Solidarity, nursing, forensic doctor. There's a long list, I won't go through it all. But essentially, it's all those organizations, NGOs, that are concerned with the rights of people with mental illness. And it was at that time that we created the Egyptian Society for Rights of People with Mental Illness, essentially advocating for people's rights. I couldn't help noticing the murals coming into university today. And back in 2010, when all this was brewing, and I was so focused on the rights of people with mental illness, and said, I could suffer from mental illness, but I'm an Egyptian citizen, so I have the right to vote. So do patients have a right to vote? And I decided to go and discuss that with the Minister of Health, and he said, seriously, Nasser, you want me in the midst of that political crisis to tell them that we're taking the patients from Abasaya to vote because that's a human right? So we failed on that one too. But in essence, yes, unless I'm deemed mentally incompetent to take decisions by a judge, the fact that I'm an inpatient in hospital doesn't take away my right as a civil person, my civil right to vote. A long way from that. So these are the various people who can sign an application to admit an individual. So this is an application for assessment. See, that's another misconception that people have, that, my brother has signed this application for me to go into hospital, and so he can admit me to hospital. It's as if he's like storing me somewhere in a fridge to keep me there. That's not true at all. These people can only apply for a doctor to assess. It's a doctor's decision that for every person admitted involuntarily, there will be an independent psychiatrist from the council coming to see that people's rights are being respected here and there. That was a hugely important concept in our law. You realize that one of the responsibilities of psychiatric hospitals is the forensic part, is the assessment of individuals who've committed an offense or a crime, and who in their defense have claimed that they suffer from mental illness that deems that they're not responsible for their actions, so they're off free. This put us into a very difficult situation because the person was either deemed responsible or not responsible for his action. And if he's not responsible, then he's not a criminal, but he's going to go to hospital for treatment. If he is responsible for his action, then he goes to jail. Fine, but the reality in the clinical work is a bit different than that, because people could be, say, somebody with an intelligence that's borderline or slightly below your borderline. And he's gone on a bus and was aggressive with a young lady or went and stole a wallet from someone's pocket. So he knows what he's doing, but you can't judge him the way you would judge somebody who's totally within his faculties. So we introduced this in our legislation of diminished responsibilities, to tell the judge, look, he is responsible, but please consider that his intelligence is not very high, and when you think of a diminished response in court, this is what you should look at. That was a new thing in the law. A very exciting part, we could do that, referred to as community treatment order. So someone's unwell. I suffer from schizophrenia and have ended up in hospital for a while. This seems to have recurred a number of times in my life. And it's now abundantly clear to my treating team that whenever I stop my medication, I relapse again. So with this law, they're able to say, okay, now, so you're going to leave hospital and you can stay home on conditions you come once a month to take that injection. And if you don't come to take the injection, the doctor has the power to bring you back to hospital. He doesn't need to wait until you're unwell for the 5th time. Now that's clear to us. So you can force somebody to take treatment in the community without bringing them to hospital. And that has kept a lot of people in life with their families without having to live in hospitals for long years. There's a long list of patients' rights. I got myself into trouble with the government then referring to patients' rights. Rights is a word that doesn't make politicians very happy. And so they suggested I should call it patients' benefits, not rights. That's important. So the long list of patients' benefits that every patient in every institution is aware of. Much of that has come from the international UN conventions. But a lot of it has had to be culturally sensitive to. When you're designing a policy or a law, the moment somebody says you've got to respect the culture, it means they don't really want to change very much. The culture is used as an excuse. We're different, You can't. Confidentiality laws, of course, in this legislation was very important. But you convince the parliamentarians, and one of them asked me, he says, "So what? So my 22-year-old girl can go to hospital, and I have no right to know what she's doing?" And I said, "Yeah, yes." And that's the law. And so that's not culturally sensitive. We're a very patriarchal society there too. But rights are rights, and you've got to. If you're going to change, you want to change everything. How am I doing on time? 5 more minutes, that's good. So this is the part where I tell you what we've done. I want to tell you where we are today, really, because you can change laws. You can pass laws in Parliament, not easily, but frequently it happens, and everyone disregards them. Not just the family. So somebody's broken the law and they go to the police station, and the officer sitting there at the police station doesn't really think much of my patient's rights. So he's not going to file the complaint. And if he files the complaint, he's going to turn it over to the attorney, who's going to ignore it as well, and it'll end up with a judge who thinks it's not very serious. So you can't apply any law or legislation in any country unless you change attitudes. And this is where advocacy becomes important, and this is where we need AUC's help. Back in 2010, at that time, we had a fund from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Finland. And of course, in those days, internet was not what it is now. And we spent millions of pounds on an advocacy campaign, but we had to go to those media tycoons and Tariq Noor and these people and spend a lot of money in creating videos to go out on television in Ramadan. That again was very expensive, or get billboards on the road to Alexandria. Those too were very expensive. And but the message was, you know, patients have rights. So there was one little video showing somebody who was applying for a job, and he seems to have had a history of mental illness, and what's happening in that interview. Another one is somebody who's just asking for directions on the streets, and no one wants to talk to him. But the irony here is that when I went to meet our consultant, Tariq Noor, in those days, and I said, you know, how about somebody who's going to propose to a girl he loves? And it turns out that he suffered from mental illness, or his brother suffered from mental illness. And this is where our media consultant, he got up and he says, really, Nasser, you want me to do that? You want me to get people to accept marrying their daughters to somebody who's had mental illness? I can't do that. And I said, look, you're our media consultants. If you don't believe in it, who's going to help us then? And so it isn't just about the laws. And one beautiful idea we've started, and if AUC could pick up on that, I mean, you've always had a very active Department of Mass Comm here. And we have, over the years, asked different departments and different universities to do a little competition on designing a campaign for the rights of people with mental illness by their students, and offering a prize for that, and many NGOs, and including ours, would be happy to support that. And then the thing is that in the process of designing this campaign, this awareness campaign, you get people thinking. And we did that for a couple of years, and we got people with great ideas, and then suddenly there was an interest. Suddenly there were television series in Ramadan about people with mental illness, about being discharged from hospitals, and many of you have seen those. So that's something AUC could really help us with very, very strongly. I think I shall stop here because we need to keep the time, but thank you so much for this. I mean, it sort of revives all the excitement we had over the years, so thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nasser, for giving us the grounding for making our effort at AUC aware of the issue of rights-based approaches to mental health, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. But now I'd like to introduce Fayrouz Ibrahim. I was lucky enough to encounter Fayrouz in a course I was teaching on the pandemic. It was a course in public health focusing on communicable diseases. And it was a time, I was teaching it during the pandemic, and it was a time where we were all suffering from the zoominess of life, suffering from the lack of human contact, suffering from not being in a classroom situation, not having the sense of an encounter with students, but yet she really shone through. And I'm very happy that she's here to talk to us today. So Fayrouz graduated from AUC last semester and is currently a master's student in anthropology sociology. So Fayrouz, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. In trying to figure out and compile all the different points to address today, I'm not only aware of the responsibility to really encapsulate all the different student profiles on campus and ways to really bring all of the issues pertinent to each together. Mental health on campus and within this community has become more prevalent now more than before, and it has become a topic of discussion and conversation, and I'm really proud to be part of this initiative that I feel is very, very important for all students on campus. In order to bring together different stakeholders to address this issue, the community repeatedly falls within particular traps that are fundamental and at the forefront of resolving several of these issues on campus. While I am speaking on the behalf of a lot of students, I'm also aware of the varied experiences of students on campus as a graduate student, but also when I was an undergraduate student. So this is around 4.5 years of experience on the AUC campus. There were extremely different views and different lived experiences when it comes to mental health care access, from mental health services or access to conversations and resources on campus, to simply having conversations with friends or colleagues about personal experiences about mental health. There were a lot of different nuances to how to resolve each. For me, as someone who has been part of the AUC community for all of these years, the most positive experiences for me were not around the services provided per se, as much as through the professors and faculty generally, who were able to really recognize the toll that mental health takes on one's academics. This connection between both issues is extremely overlooked from the perspective of leniency, mutual understanding, and respect more than the formal and procedural or bureaucratic procedures that we need to go through in order to access mental health in any way, shape, or form. For most students, our experience is highly shaped by our professors and our classes and the faculty and staff that we encounter, more than trying to access mental health through the wellness center or through the formal procedures that we do have on campus. With that said, there are fundamental external factors that make mental health a topic of discussion and a topic to address extremely difficult. As Dr. Nasser has already addressed, there is a lexicon of societal shame and taboo, and the stigma around seeking mental health assistance or medical attention for mental health specifically is extremely different than seeking medical attention for physical health issues. And this is internalized by most students on campus and becomes an extremely difficult experience to navigate. However, as a community of faculty, staff, students, and administrators, I think it's extremely important to normalize mental health as a situation or as an experience that is lived by most of us, if not formally, informally, through our conversations and through fostering a community of care and a community of conversation and a community of safety. Studying or the education system generally necessitates extremely high caliber commitment and work ethic, which is not to say that these things do not necessarily breed mental health issues, but it is to say that they do complicate most of our experience as students. And for a vast majority of the student body, they do breed mental health issues. The point stands that this is where the involvement of the university needs to be apparent and robust. Mechanisms and procedures also complicate to a large extent this process of seeking help. Many people, many I have known and spoken to personally, speak extensively about the difficulty of seeking help or assistance because of the bureaucratic procedures in place, because of unawareness of where to go or who to talk to, or where to actually seek this kind of attention, or whether they need attention or they need any kind of assistance or not, which ultimately are in place. All of these systems and procedures, they ultimately are in place in order to ensure the efficiency of the collective system. However, they do make it harder for some students who are already going through hard times to speak up and to actually seek such services for themselves. There are also extremely, which may seem trivial as I mentioned them now, but these are things that I have spoken to a lot of my colleagues about, and these are things that we experience through our semesters that are often overlooked. But these are things that really add to the mental health difficulties that or experience that we go through. Aspects such as deadline anxiety, which is something that is not necessarily resolved through counseling per se, or someone that has anxiety around deadlines or around papers or around exam times may not necessarily go to counseling, but it is something that is promoted by grading and by all of this difficulty within being in academia. This is secondhand nature to academia. However, a lot of freshmen and sophomores especially have extreme anxiety also around maintaining extremely high GPAs in order to declare their majors that they wish to pursue if it's still in their beginning of their journey as undergraduate students. And this causes further anxiety and worry and stress, as Dr. Dalal had already mentioned, about the courses that they are registering for example. My personal experience with this and what I have seen firsthand is that those courses become more of a challenge and not a learning experience, because the end goal is to get a B+, for instance, or a higher grade, and it's not about to learn or to actually immerse oneself in the course content. It's about the ultimate goal of getting a grade. So any kind of anxiety or stress or worry that comes second nature to that, and a lot of students just accept that as being matter of fact to the nature of the course, or to the AUC experience, or to the experience of being a student, which should not and is not necessarily the case for a lot of other students. These types of anxieties are extremely difficult for a lot of students, and it's sometimes difficult to communicate those concerns with professors. There are also life events or circumstances that occur throughout the academic year or amidst a particular semester where it becomes the primary role of professors to provide any type of support, comfort, or understanding. And this can come in as simple as a response to an email explaining, for example, the situation. If a student is explaining that they are going through a difficult time, this type of leniency from professors was one of the biggest motivations that I had when I was going personally through hardships or through difficult semesters throughout my undergraduate years, or even through my graduate year, this past graduate year. I still remember the professors that offered me any kind of support or understanding, and it is not within the direct mandate of professors to be that kind of main supporter or supportive figure, but for most of us students, we truly remember and truly appreciate this understanding and support that may be provided by them. Further, to really engulf as many experiences of students as I could, I spoke to several friends and colleagues, which I recognize as limiting given that I was also only talking within a very specific social circle. However, I was trying to diversify the amount of the voices and the opinions that I do relate today, so as not to only immerse my experience as being the uniform AUC student experience. A lot of students spoke about the difficulty in seeking help, which is something I previously mentioned, in order to get assistance from, for example, the Wellness Center or from any other centers on campus. Those that did eventually go through with booking or trying to or being matched with therapists or doctors found that the evaluation process wasn't very suitable for what they were looking for. There were issues about confidentiality, comfort, and the procedure itself, and the time to get assistance, which is already difficult if someone is going through a very stressful situation and they still need to wait for a week or more in order to get this kind of assistance. It already adds to the stress of the situation at hand, and this is something that I personally experienced from the Wellness Center. Others who eventually were matched with doctors and went to the sessions were not always comfortable because, as I previously mentioned, there are issues with confidentiality that were brought up. And for several students, there are fundamental concerns about the provision of mental health services on campus generally. There are those that go to these centers because they're affordable and they're easy to access, seeing as we're always on campus. So it's easy to actually go to the centers, for example, in the middle of a work week or in the middle of the day. However, there are still extreme difficulties in trying to navigate and maneuver through these situations if there are concerns that are sustained through these through the Wellness Center or through other centers on campus. Obviously, I'm also reiterating that this is not the experience of most students. This is experience that, or these are the main concerns that are circulated amongst the student body. These are concerns that have been circulating for several years. And I still do remember them from my freshman year up until my first year as an MA student. However, there is not a single uniform student experience that can really inform any decision or change that can happen on campus. With all of these experiences, community engagement needs to be at the forefront and at the foreground of any efforts that we do take. And these efforts need to be informed by the community and for the community, for faculty, for staff, for students, especially as I do speak from a student experience and from a student's perspective. As someone who has been part of the AUC community for almost 5 years and as someone who has engaged extensively in extracurricular activities and engaged with several members of the AUC community, I believe that community engagement is essential to actually implementing fruitful solutions to issues such as mental health issues or any other pertinent issues for that matter. So I hope that today's conversation and today's talks and discussion will act as a stepping stone towards the right direction and to try and inform the efforts to mitigate the mental health issues on campus and ultimately creating a more generative, inclusive, safer, and freer environment for all of the AUC community, especially the AUC students. Thank you all.
Thank you, Fayrouz. Now we have 45 minutes of discussion, and we have people participating online and the floor. And what I'll do is, I'm sure there are lots of questions. I'll pool them so that we are efficient with time. I just have one thing to add to what has already been said, and that is to remind us that mental health and well-being is not only our own, but those we love and those we live with. And often this affects us on campus. And coming across students who may themselves be in the prime of health, but who have family members or who have loved ones who have a burden. And I think this is another kind of support that we need to extend, because the prevalence is high, and we know that from validated measurements. We know that from the kind of toxic influences that we all live with, whether they're digital or whether they are commercial, the degree to which our life has been commercialized, the degree to which the transgressions of the digital inform our decisions, the lack of a sense of tactile personhood, because we exist in all of these different spheres of existence. So I really think that it's important for us in this initiative, or for President Dallal and whoever is on the task force, to view this from a public mental health perspective. And public mental health, like public health, is about community-driven factors and community-created opportunities to create health and support. So any questions? I'll start from the floor. Okay, there is Maha, and then Aziza. Yeah, and Mirvat, Dr. Faras. We'll take these 4 questions, and then we'll go to the... so just say the questions, and then...
Sure. So I'm going to ask these as questions. I know, Dr. Nasser, you're talking about mental health in Egypt as a whole, but I'm asking these questions for AUC. Specifically, is AUC willing to tackle systemic issues that are affecting the mental health of faculty and students, and change systems that, for example, promote suspicion and skepticism rather than trust of students, help faculty learn how to be compassionate teachers? Some of them do it intuitively and some of them don't. So that it's a responsibility of everyone, and not that students have to go to the wellness center, but that all of us are responsible for everybody's mental health. So that's, not having a deficit approach, but having an approach where it's a culture of supporting mental health. So that's my question.
My question really is to Fayrouz, as a student. You pointed out very clearly to what the triggers or the points or the sources of stress and anxiety. And as you know, mental health has many degrees. But for the majority, what you've mentioned is for everybody. Students get stressed, specifically on grades and so on. And you've pointed out some of what is, the reasons for all of these, and maybe you can address them. But I also think a main source are the parents of the house, at home. And that is not often mentioned, and it's often also I need to know what would you suggest? To bring them into the conversation, but also they are a big source of the stress that is put on, whether they are the choice of majors or their comments on grades and so on and so forth.
My question is to Dr. Loza, as well as I really enjoyed the talks. To what extent or how would we encourage students? I relate that we all have mental issues, I think grown-ups even more. But to what extent can we approach them to be able to let go of secrets they know of their friends, where they are very reluctant to share with grown-ups because they would be bad friends? I've been into so many cases of the sort, and of course I resort to our only source of info in this regard, Dr. Ola Mursi, to tell me how to guide them, because I'm not an expert. As a faculty member, we are in dire need to have this kind of, we have the desire to help, but at the same time, you would be the most resourceful person to really let us know how we can help you help others. So it's not only the person who is actually suffering from mental health, it's actually how you can help others in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you for this. It's very encouraging to see that we're all meeting here today to really take an aggressive approach to beginning at least a discussion that involves everybody on campus. So my question is first to Fayrouz. You were talking about leniency. I wonder if you're factoring compassion from faculty into that as well. And second of all, as a student, you yourself, or from what you've heard from your peers, there's something I've been picking up in a lot of students is that they have a fear of approaching their faculty to discuss issues openly. Sometimes they feel that they might be ridiculed or intimidated or even bullied, and so they go to someone else. Maybe, I mean, in this case, they would come to me to talk to me about faculty that are outside of our department. And so this leads me to another question that I have for President Dalal and also for Provost Ihab, is how far is AUC willing to go to tackle the kind of unwillingness among some faculty to address this issue seriously? I have heard from some faculty over the years that the accommodation letters, for example, that we receive, they don't take them seriously. Students have stopped going to the Office of Wellbeing to ask for accommodation letters because they say the faculty don't really accommodate them. Now that's not true for all faculty. Some actually bend over backwards to help, but it's not something that's applied evenly throughout campus. So these are the questions I have for you today. Thank you.
Okay, I can start with the question about parents, or should we go in like a specific order? Okay, I do agree that parents or like household situations generally add to a lot of stress and anxiety, and especially when it comes to, for example, choice of majors or grades. Sorry, excuse me. However, with that, I do believe that those situations are outside, to a large extent, the role of the faculty or role of the staff or administrators on campus to try to fix situations at home. It becomes the responsibility of the student, and this is something that the student carries as they go through their day, for example, at AUC or through their classes. And this is where I was talking, and this is something I can further address in terms of leniency, is that there are sometimes situations at home that are very difficult to address. There are also students that live in the dorms, which is also an added layer of stress, that they are away from their families. So this is also another experience. I personally have not experienced living in the dorms, but I have spoken to some students that do. So this dissonance or this distance actually from their families, whether physically in terms of living not in the household itself, or a distance from their parents in terms of any tensions at home, all of these things are experiences that we carry, or like loads that we carry through our days, and they do impact a very large extent the way we go about in academia or in our academics, in our classes. So I feel like this kind of influence, like what can actually be changed in this regard, is the role of faculty, because as I was saying, faculty or our professors are literally other than our friends, for instance, they're the most people that we interact with, whether in the classroom itself, during class time, or during class hour, during office hours, or even the professors that we do reach out to for help or for any kind of assistance outside of that formal setting. Our professors are, to a large extent, our friends. Yeah, most of my professors, we've eventually had a relationship outside of the formal relationship, and I think that's one of the very, very important things at AUC. The professors at AUC, and it's something that I think is very important. I think that's in regards to that.
very relevant questions. Thank you very much. And I think the common answer to many of those questions, including what AUC can do, approaching parents and getting them involved, and how can I help young people to open up in their secrets. The short answer, the one-word answer is fight stigma, you see. There are about 100 of us in this room. Statistically speaking, roughly, probably over 25% of us, 25 people in this room, have at one point or another in their lives suffered from depression, let alone the other conditions, let alone. But I think if we were to ask President Salal now that we would set up a separate room over here for people who want to talk about their experience with depression, I think very few of us would get up and go to that room, particularly if it had a sign on it saying psychotherapy or psychiatry. And I think the answer is, if you're going to spend $100 in providing services for people with psychological needs, 50 of those, 50%, $50 should go towards anti-stigma. It'll help people willingness to go for help, to get help, and willingness to open up with their faculty, with their parents, and others, and open up with the secrets. I mean, the reason we're afraid to talk about our inner feelings is because of the fear, the stigma. I'll be labeled. Will I be able to apply for graduate studies if I admit to everybody that I've suffered from one episode of bipolar disorder? Would it reduce my sister's chance of getting married if society knows about these things? So that is the shortcut, really. And in trying to work anti-stigma campaigns in my life, one approach is to go and spend a lot of money on media campaigns. Two is to invite speakers such as myself or other doctors to talk about it. But yeah, it's a very nice audience. Thank you. I don't want to belittle that, but we're about 100 people. But instead of having a doctor, if you had somebody who actually has suffered from the experience and is willing to talk about it. When I'm invited to talk about my own experience with depression after COVID, it reaches people's hearts a lot more than a clinician or a scientist. But much better than inviting doctors, if you can invite famous actors, famous politicians. They draw much more audience, and much larger audience than us doctors, I promise you. But to top the list better than any minister or any actress are the football players. You get a soccer player to talk about their experience with mental illness, and you've reached millions around the world. So anti-stigma campaigns is the answer to many of the questions you made. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasser. Although you shouldn't belittle 100 people for an AUC event. I mean, come on, you've got no idea. Yeah. So I'm going to excuse the floor and take some questions from people joining us online, and I will read the question and give it to one speaker because it'll be too difficult. They're very long questions. So the first question is to Fayrouz from Manuel Schwab, a colleague, and it says, Fayrouz, it's alarming to hear about the confidentiality issues you mentioned students encountering, given that they are the bedrock of any culture of care. Can you elaborate a bit more about where students are finding these concerns, given that one would assume that confidentiality is a non-negotiable given? If you could briefly answer that, Fayrouz.
As far as I can say, because also it was a confidential situation, but there have been rumors and there have been experiences where people were talking about their experiences with very specific situations, and other students that were also going to those same doctors were made aware of them in that same setting, I would say, as far as I can elaborate. And then this became a concern for a lot of other students that became aware of the fact that confidentiality has been breached to some extent. And this was a couple of years ago, but this difficulty, or this, I don't know what to call it exactly, but this situation has made it very difficult and has created a lot of concerns around certain centers on campus, I would say.
Now, add one word on that's a problem I haven't resolved, and if anybody has any ideas. But it was my daughter, who was in her early 20s, who heard me talk about confidentiality and also talk about anti-stigma and how mental illness is nothing to be embarrassed about. And she's the one who said, look, Daddy, you've got to make up your mind. You can't tell people that mental illness is something we should be able to talk about openly, but then pass a law that fines them or jails them if they break confidentiality. I mean, you're contradicting yourself here. And the more, confidentiality is very important in therapy, but it is contributing to stigma, of course. Well, we can't help that. Thank you.
It's true, it's complex, and what Fayrouz is saying is even if the breach does not occur, the fear of the breach is in itself a deterrent, and in Egypt in general, this has happened to all of us. You go to a doctor and they tell you who else you know was just visiting them, whether it's a psychiatrist or a gynecologist or so. It's really common, oh, I know your friend, she was just here. So this issue of medical ethics, I think, is something we should be doing more to address as a problem and not as a set of guidelines. We have a question from Michel Hébert about the statistics from AUC, but I think that's something for AUC to produce, maybe to destigmatize. The next question is for Nasser, and it's from Wafa Saeed. Thank you for precious insights. I need to ask about the process of hiring new staff members who will communicate directly with students, and they have some sort of authority over students. How can we protect students from some professors who are themselves mentally unstable and extreme?
Oh, me to answer that? Supporting mental health is not about authority. You know the expression, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. I can't be a therapist and at the same time be a controlling agent who forces people to do things. It's a contradiction of concepts there. So I'm afraid I can't oblige with your request there. No, we're here for people who want help. But you can't give authority to the mental health professionals. I mean, that'll be up to AUC to decide what they do with that. Yeah.
We have one question, one anonymous question. How can I help a close friend who refuses to take a step to go to a psychiatrist? And I put it to Fayrouz and to Nasser.
I guess the way to help would depend on what your friend suffers from. But by and large, yes, offering an ear and listening to their problems, setting examples, talking about your own fears and anxieties opens the doors for people to talk about their feelings, sharing your own experience and your loved ones. So it helps people if I'm able to tell them, I've been through what you've been through. I know exactly how it feels. It makes them much more at ease. So you might try that approach.
I think that's a very valid thing because personally, a really short while back, for example, like a month ago, me and 3 of my very close friends, and they're all guys, and this is something that I've seen with my friends who are girls, not to be creating distinction, but the guys don't talk about mental health at all or don't talk about seeking therapy at all. It's not as frequent. But I'm the one that Loa put it out there. Loa, guys, I was seeing a therapist, and then the 3 of them were also seeing therapists, but none of us had ever had a conversation around that, and that just opened the conversation that we all went to seek therapy, and we actually opened up a conversation amongst ourselves. So I think that's a very important thing, and even if we're very close to our friends and we spend, for example, hours with them or we're very, very close, opening up conversations and explicitly talking about experiences of mental health or mental struggles, or extending a sort of empathetic understanding to what they're going through your own experiences. I think that's a very important thing. It opens up a conversation or an environment where we can all talk openly.
Okay, I'll take a last couple of questions from the online participants, and they're questions from May Esem, Yusuf Ragai, and others about how to enable faculty to deal with mental health conditions or phases. How can we become more aware? Is it reasonable to have a 5 to 10 minute mental health check with students inside the classrooms? So I put that to Nasser.
I feel for you. You realize that there's a need for faculty to be able to gauge the wellness, if there is such thing. I'm not quite sure what we can do in 5 minutes, but except possibly deliver a message of, there's an open door. I know how it feels. I know what it's like to be living in the dorms away from your family. That's something you've never been used to. I went through it myself, and be able to open the door for them to say, if there's any need, come and talk to me or to the counseling center. And I think that's if that's an answer, that's a shortcut for it.
Do we have questions from the floor? We have, okay, from the back, and if you could introduce yourself. We can take a few questions and then go back.
Okay, I have two suggestions. Oh yeah, I'm Ibrahim. I'm a student, economics. I have two suggestions, but first I really want to say this has been a long time coming, and I really want to thank the president and the administration for finally addressing the elephant in the campus. Okay, so my two suggestions were, firstly, I think I wish there was a community like wellness focus group that kind of meets regularly on campus. So it's basically an open space for people to express themselves, for students. And I wish it would include student volunteers as something practical that people know is there, And also I wish that this mental health initiative would create events just generic events that would encourage anyone to come, like sports, recreational events, but that help, bring attention to just to the fact that this, initiative exists. And finally, I think student volunteers, really important because we want to encourage a sense of community and get students involved. I think this will make it so much more effective. It's the discussion, I think, between students and students is probably the most important one. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you for this useful talk. I think it's very important that we're looking at addressing mental health students and faculty and staff who are on campus experiencing difficulties, and this is a major side to this, but also all of our faculty and most people on campus are not equipped to treat mental health issues, but the major area that all of us, I think, can contribute to is maybe prevention or creating in the academic area and in the co-curricular area, a place that's safe for students to falter in learning and not perform and then pick up again. And I think we need to take a very good look at our academic policies and see how that it cannot be one size fits all. And I think when we create especially, for example, first-year students, that's a major transition that creates a lot of stress. And we're not trying to eliminate stress. I don't think stress is a part of life where we should help them develop strategies for resilience and stress management. But I think we should recognize among the majority of our students that we should create a place where where they have a community and networks so that when they do experience stress, it doesn't develop into something more difficult.
Thank you, Reda. We have 3 questions from this side. Dalal,
Hi.
Okay, go ahead and then the
Okay.
Go ahead. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah. I'm Maisa. I'm the program coordinator for the Masters in Sustainable Development. I just have one question and one comment on the stigmatization. My question is asked as a relatively new staff member to AUC. I've been here for less than a year. I was wondering if it's possible to get like a baseline reference of what's already being done at AUC for mental health. I know the Wellness Center was mentioned. The Department of Psychology has, resources available for students, but, is it also available for staff and faculty? What are the numbers? What are their challenges? So that we can build on that rather than starting from scratch. Yeah.
Thank you. Dalal?
Hi, I was talking to my husband about how glad I am that you guys are forming a task force and how strongly I feel that this is just not an option to just give this as one of the options you have, but an essential part of education, and that's been unfortunately brought to light even more after COVID. I was listening to you discuss confidentiality and sort of assuming that it's going to happen, that doctors will slip up, and in my opinion, this is just a non-negotiable part of it. We expect that from our OBGYN. We expect that from, people don't want to discuss whether they're having fertility issues or this or that. They don't want to discuss if they're going to go get whatever surgery for this reason or that reason. And there is an oath doctors take. So I'm not sure how that can be fixed overall, but here it should be just, that's how it is. I don't want to hear about somebody else, and if you want to discuss it, you should go somewhere else, because this is not accepted in this institution. It takes a lot of courage for people to go and ask for help. And after they go through overcoming their own fears of being stigmatized, when they go to that person, first of all, I think one of the things, and I'm not sure how it is at AUC, there shouldn't be a huge wait time for people to seek help. When they make that first contact and we tell them we'll see you after 4 months, I think that's completely, I'm just making that up, I don't know. I'm saying it has to be something we take advantage of. Your cry for help or your desire for support should be answered within a reasonable amount of time. And the words we use matter. I was at an airport about a week ago, and someone was getting their child out of a overseas university and was talking about, he's just gone crazy, I have to go get him, he's off his meds. And this is his own father, and he was saying it with a loving thing, I have to take care of him. And I said, him hearing that will make him less likely to reach out to you. I'm still learning about the difference between mental health and mental illness, and how you can have a mental illness and be perfectly functional when it's addressed, whether it's a chemical imbalance or otherwise. And what I've seen really have an impact, I agree with you, public figures. Having an actress, I remember in the 90s, Brooke Shields, talk about postpartum depression, brought that into a public, I'm dating myself, it's old, so. But having somebody like The Rock talk about his own bouts of depression and anxiety, having famous NBA players being interviewed outside the court when they win and say, I'd like to thank my therapist who really helped me yesterday get ready for the game. You see this giant who's making gazillions of dollars discuss and normalize talking to his therapist to handle the pressure. And all of this helps look at mental health not as a weakness and not as a cop-out. Because a lot of us, our responsibility is really to just listen. I hear a lot of people say, well, if you could just work out, you'll feel better, or pray more, that faith will help you get out of it. If we look at it as, if you have an arm that's cut, are you just gonna let it bleed, or will you get help? If we look at it as a physical and actual chemical imbalance you have, no matter the reasons, the genetic or situational, PTSD, if we look at it that way, and we help people look at it that way, then, you know, let's discuss it in a way that's just not judgmental. Unless you are a therapist or a psychiatrist or a counselor, let's not give unnecessary advice that have no place in this discussion.
My grandmother used to say, just go for a walk. When you're upset, go for a brisk walk. Mirvat has a short question, and then I'll go back to the online.
I'll give you the mic in a minute because it's something that I would like to mention. I think it's a little bit of a resolution or something that has to do with what May is going to be, I hope, talking about. Basically, for the sake of fairness, with faculty, some faculty members, they'd like to help, but they really don't find it in their power to help. And perhaps because they themselves are trying to seek help, but they don't get it. I mean, I may be suffering from mental shortage of trying to be able to help others. So this is one element. The other note that you brought up, that there are so many things that have been happening at AUC to try to address mental health, but unfortunately, they are either stopped after the COVID, or they've not been resumed. I think one of the major problems would be that they're not everyone, they really involved all the constituents, on the top of which are students. We have so many committees, so many subcommittees, so many reports, so many things that have been happening, and the main constituents of that to represent the community of AUC were not represented enough. I think that's also important.
We have a comment. We have actually 34 comments online. So what I'm going to do is try to get our last comment from the floor and then summarize, I'm sorry, because it's just out of fairness, and then give our speakers a chance to conclude.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's not just a comment, it's a proposal. I'm a certified happiness trainer from the States, and I can see that it's a must, and it's very, it's an imperative approach to build a whole being concept at the AUC. Whole being with involving, as Mirvat has just mentioned, as Dr. Ghada has just highlighted, that we need to counteract lots of mental issues by building an awareness system that tackles psychological well-being, emotional well-being, relational well-being, and how to engage all the different stakeholders like parents, teachers, students who might be interested to add value to that approach. Mind and body are connected, so we cannot isolate something from something major. So it's extremely important to do some positive interventions, even into the classrooms. We can start the 5 minutes, as one of the students has just mentioned, by adding a mindful exercise, yoga, building, promoting students to take part in doing lots of things, nutrition, everything has to do in synchronization to everything. This is just a proposal.
Thank you. Noor? I saw I didn't see Noor is another student, so.
Thank you. I'm going to try to be quick. I wanted to touch upon an idea that I think was like overriding in all of the interventions made by everyone, which is I think that like we shouldn't be addressing mental health initiative as abstracts from the rest of our interactions. I think we should also be looking at the triggers themselves and ensuring that there is accountability for the people causing, or the institutions or the structures or departments or whatever it may be that's actually causing the triggers, because I think this is also a reason why students kind of shy away from addressing the issue, whether to their departments or their faculty or to anyone. It's because they feel like their voices don't matter, because historically over the past few years, a lot of the times we've raised concerns that were not met, and I think it's important that for us to kind of hold departments that we know are causing a lot of stress for students accountable, or for instance, this is an example, I'm not throwing shade at anyone, but for instance, a lot of students say that they have issues with advising where they're told that they should take a course, and then when they come to declare, it's not the same course, and so on and so forth, and such changes contribute to the stress, but are not being targeted at a systemic level. And I also wanted to ask if it would have merit for us to also include a walk-in section in the Department of Wellbeing or the Office of Wellbeing, because like Ms. Dalal was saying, it is very invalidating to kind of get a message that you're going to have an appointment 4 months later, and I think maybe the walk-ins could kind of, solve, even not all of the people that are waiting on the waiting list, but I think it could help maybe students who don't need a constant checkup or don't need constant interventions. Maybe it will help with people who need a day-to-day thing. I'm not sure if this is a feasible option also from Dr. Nabil Salibi's point of view, but I think it would kind of also take some weight off of the psychologists and the doctors at the Wellbeing Center itself. And Rani, on that point, I'm very sorry to be taking so much time. But I think that we should also, since this is a time where we're reallocating budgets for next year and every office and every area is working on that, it's high time for us to think how we can optimize the resources given to the Office of Wellbeing. Thank you.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is that whereas AUC has tended to bureaucratize and medicalize the issues, that students want to socialize and politicize it. And I think that that's a very valid perspective, that there are political issues, there are power imbalances, and that we should bridge that divide. Final comment from a student, then we have some comments online. And
well, I was a student. I'm currently a staff. My name is Walid Al-Aghbari. I'm from Yemen. I've been a student at AUC for about let's say 10 years as a bachelor's student and a master's degree student. And I would say one thing that we have to put in mind is, first of all, to recognize trauma and understand the implications and think about the possible practical practices that can be set in motion by either staff members or faculty to address the traumas that students face. I would speak at least as a former student. Being a scholarship student adds a layer of stress. And maybe one I would say, factor that would help a student grow better in this living environment is to know that there is some leniency, some acceptance and flexibility, not only by the faculty members, but by the staff members or coordinators, I would say, managing those scholarships. That's one layer. Another layer is to look into the culture and the history of the student prior to starting the class, and that's a message to faculty members. Try to know where they come from. Try to know all the burden they come with, whether from their home countries or by living here on campus in previous semesters. Maybe this will help you as a faculty member know the best way or the better replacement to having a written exam, for example, to having an essay or a take-home. This flexibility would allow students to know that there is some room for understanding and trust from the faculty member or the staff member. And last but not least, let's try to enhance the culture of storytelling. I believe this has gone missing due to COVID, possibly, but storytelling is a model or a practice that faculty members can try in class. And when students relate to these past experiences from previous days in university by the faculty members, they would relate and they would understand that whatever difficulty they are facing at the moment can pass. So enhancing this culture of storytelling would help, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walid. I think that role of custodial care, not just academic care. We have 37 comments here, so I'm going to just apologize. I'm going to ask the organizers to please list all of these 38 questions on the website that is created for this event, but of course anonymize it, because I think a lot of very valuable comments are here and they should be part of the event, even if I can't read them out. I will read out two and then ask our speakers to conclude so that we stick to time. So one is from Dr. Hanan Saba. Losing 2 students at AUC to suicide in 6 weeks tells us we are facing a very serious issue. The issue relates to trust in the services offered, the high cost of receiving treatment outside campus. I would suggest a network that brings wellness center with outside services to create a fund to support those seeking help. The other comment is actually from someone who's saying, if I need to get meds for depression, HR has to sign off on that. And what does that do to my prospects at AUC? And a lot of the other questions are about the confidentiality issues, about the service issues, about the destigmatization, about our preparedness as faculty to deal with these issues. And I think that the comments, when we collate them and put them all online, show that there are systemic issues. There are systemic things that we can do that are, again, not to medicalize or not to pathologize, but to say that these are the elements that can create a healthy ecosystem and a healthy, positive learning environment that is also fair and just. And with that, I will turn to Fayrouz for concluding words, and then Nasser for concluding words, and maybe Dr. Dallal would like to say something at the end.
I just want to clarify, I need that.
Yeah. It's set in stone, khalas. It's okay. Khalas, now it's 4 months.
And I include staff and professors. We talk about students and they should be the priority, but staff members and professors go through things, and we've all gone through COVID together, so I think that's also part of the community.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for their engagement and everyone's comments. I think it's very fruitful for us to engage collectively as a community, and for, as I previously mentioned, for all of the initiatives or any effort that comes out of this event to be driven by all of our collective concerns, not just the concerns of singular individuals. I think, as Dr. Hania has mentioned, addressing the systemic issues that really trigger or really add to the stresses and the anxieties that we experience on campus is going to be extremely generative to actually fostering this community of care or fostering a community of safety and well-being generally. Whether through academic policies that are at times very rigid, or, for example, instances where faculty do not take into consideration well-being generally, or if someone has, like Dr. Feroz was mentioning, if someone has a letter from the Office of Wellbeing or accommodation letter, sorry, I forgot that. An accommodation letter, even before that, some students do not want to go through the process of getting accommodation letters, but that doesn't devalidate from their own experiences, and that doesn't devalidate from any mental health issues that they are going through. And I think this is where fostering this community of care and mutual respect and trust is very important, that I could potentially approach, for example, Dr. Hania, if I'm taking a course with Dr. Hania, and mention that I went through something, for example, last week, but I don't have an accommodation letter from the Office of Wellbeing. That doesn't devalidate my experience, but that does require some sort of understanding from the professor as well as from the students. And I think that's where mutual understanding and really engaging the community and fostering this environment is going to be very fruitful moving forward.
Thank you very much, really. Now remains to be said that this day has been fantastic. It's sort of music to my ears, President Salal. So thank you very much for doing that. I was thinking here, if I was to go back in time and replan this again, I would love to see this having a longer time, as I can see by the questions and the interest. I would have loved to have a panel that would include We refer to them as service users, as somebody who's had an experience with mental difficulty and talking about their own experience. That would be very helpful. And allow for more interaction. It'd be great to have somebody who we haven't had time to talk about online support and online psychotherapy. That has boomed obviously with COVID, but it's here to stay. It provides total confidentiality and anonymity, and I think it's a very important part of any well-being support. So hopefully we'll do it again, hopefully we'll have more time, and hopefully we'll have a service user with us on the panel. Thank you.
Dr. Dallal, in this country we're used to presidents then reiterating everything that was said for 2 hours, so...
First of all, I would like to thank all of you, both present in person and virtually, for your input today, and of course thank our moderator and speakers for your valuable input. I want to stress what I said earlier, that we really are keen to foster a culture of care on campus and to prioritize the mental well-being of our community. So the next step will be to select members of the task force. I'll be working on that in the next 2 weeks. And by the way, as Dr. Hania said, please, whoever has access to the questions that were raised, I don't need the names, but I need the questions, unless people want me to know their names, so that we take into their input into consideration. So the next step would be to select the members of the task force, which hopefully will immediately put in place an action plan building on today's discussion with you, and also building on the recommendations put forward by our participants, our panel. There are, I've been taking notes, and as we speak, and of course I've been thinking about this. I mean, there are obviously a number of things that we need to, a number of fronts that we need to work on, that the task force, with our collective help and contribution, needs to work on. The first thing, we need to figure out what our environment is about. What are the challenges that our community is actually, members of our community are actually facing? Data. Get some data, get an assessment of the current situation. This is obviously, regardless of what we're doing, we need to have some solid assessment of our current situation. And then we need to work on 3 fronts. We need to work on the cultural front, on the culture of well-being and mental health. We need to destigmatize. We need to promote a positive approach to the whole question of mental health, rather than thinking of it as a stigma and so on. Mental health and well-being. We need to have a communication strategy. We need to have outreach initiatives. We need to have programs, and programs are different from services. Programs are different. So we're not going to wait a full year for a task force to write its report. I mean, I'll be asking the task force to suggest, and our community collectively to suggest initiatives that we could start working on in the weeks to come, and as we do the systematic work of the task force. The second level is the level of services. And clearly, there is room always. There is room to improve the services that we provide. And once again, services and programs are different things. Programs are about much broader sets of issues. They will inform the way we develop and shape our services, but they're very different from each other. And then the third level, the third area where we need to do work is at the administrative level. Introduce administrative improvements, policies, protocols, procedures, training across the board, and so on and so forth. There were a couple of questions that were directed to me by colleagues, by Maha and Firas specifically. Will the administration do or not do? There are things that we already do, and we can do them more systematically and consistently, but this is more about, of course, there is room for putting in place the right and refining and polishing our administrative approaches, but it's really bigger than that. It's about a collective commitment to this subject that we need to work on together. So the key is to institutionalize our structures of support, whether through the services or the policies that we have, or the training regimes and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, our hearts have to be in this. So we need to come up with programs, think of programs that will change our approach to issues of mental health. This is a bigger challenge. We will work on the institutional level. We will not shy away from our responsibility, and hopefully with all of your support, we'll be able to do much. But we also need to work on changing, on a cultural change across the board. And this is the real challenge for us. And hopefully we'll be able to work on this immediately. Give me a couple of weeks, because I need to think of, I really don't know exactly who should be. And again, the task force is only a task force. It will take the lead in putting together, an assessment and, a work plan and so on, but it has to work with all of you, with everyone who really has something to say, has a point of view, has a perspective, has a concern, or is willing to contribute. And I know, as I told you, many of you have already said that they want to be part of this, they want to contribute to this effort. It's really heartening to see this, and I'm gonna call on you to do this. So thank you again for this, and hopefully we'll start doing even more very quickly. Thanks.